Good evening, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, what a wonderful turnout. It's so good to be standing up here and seeing all of you. Thank you for joining us here tonight at Senate House. I'm Kingsley Abbott. I'm the Director of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, and it is our enormous honour to host the CARICOM Reparations Commission and Sir Hilary Beckles here in London this week. Their visit is a historic visit. It's the Commission's first official visit to the United Kingdom. And it's been undertaken with the aim of raising consciousness, deepening understanding, and correcting some misconceptions about reparatory justice. And we are genuinely delighted to host the Commission here at Senate House. And that is because bringing people together to talk about some of the major issues confronting the world and the Commonwealth has been very much part of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies DNA for now 75 years. The Institute did it on the independence movement, on ending apartheid. Just last week we were here talking about combating climate collapse and protecting the environment, and tonight we are coming together to talk about the pressing issue of reparatory justice. It's a continuation of that mission of the Institute. And as you will hear this evening, acceptance of the need for meaningful dialogue on reparatory justice is growing. And just one powerful example is that on the 26th of October last year, at the conclusion of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa, all 56 member states unanimously issued a leader statement committing to continuing to play an active role in bringing about such inclusive conversations on reparatory justice, addressing these harms, paying special attention to women and girls who suffered disproportionately from these appalling tragedies in the history of humanity. So the commitment is there. That is governments representing 2.7 billion people committed to opening and advancing conversations like this very one tonight. And in those conversations, academic spaces like this one, they matter. And that is because they are places of research, of rigour, of reflection, and the constructive collision of ideas, opinions, and perspectives. Speaking of such scholarship, it is now my great pleasure to invite to the stage and to welcome Sir Hilary Beckles, who, as you know, is one of the world's leading thinkers on this issue and has been for decades, and someone who himself was a fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies some 38 years ago. Sir Hilary, welcome back.
Thank you so very much, Kingsley. It's wonderful to be back. Thank you. You know, in 2001, we were all gathered in Durban, South Africa, to discuss this very subject. It was a very divisive moment, filled with rage and anger. And those of us who had arrived there, laden with the philosophy of justice and doing the best for humanity, found ourselves in a political crossfire. At the end of it, when I returned to the Caribbean to give a debriefing lecture on what actually transpired there at the United Nations Conference, I made the observation that reparatory justice will be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. This was 2001, and we had just started. Most of my colleagues thought maybe my statement was hyperbolic, bit of an extreme statement to make. We've just started a new century, and here's this guy from the Caribbean speaking about the greatest movement of the 21st century. I also made the observation that the hatred that filled the halls of that conference, that the intensity and the volume of that hatred had to go somewhere. We were told from the Caribbean, how dare you place before us this conversation about reparatory justice for the crimes of slavery. How dare you? Who gave you the audacity to come before us, the world, and present this narrative? And there was palpable anger and rage. I had never experienced that kind of rage and anger before. But as an historian, I had found it in the historical evidence of the documentation of history. But personally, I never felt that kind of anger and hatred before. And so I ended my presentation in Barbados with the notion that the world is in very bad shape. The world is in very bad shape. Here you are speaking about justice, and the response to that conversation is vexation, rage, and anger. And I felt that I had to say this publicly, that something terrible is going to happen to humanity with all of this rage. 3 days later, I woke up and saw airplanes being flown into buildings in New York, and innocent people being burnt to death in buildings. Like all of you, I would have seen one plane and I thought maybe pilot error, then 2 planes and 3 planes. And all of those people burnt to death. A week or 2 later, I received a visit from someone who identified himself as a member of the FBI, who wanted to know if I understood what I had said and whether I had met someone in Durban who might have given me an inclination to hold the thoughts which I held, or whether I was some kind of voodoo man who was perceiving the future. I was, of course, stunned by all of this. But I knew that this historical conversation would march on. And here I am now, 24 years later, reflecting upon all of that and overwhelmed by what is now a global movement. Started as a small plea from African peoples in the diaspora, asking about justice and poverty and unemployment and economic marginalization, and how history has connected all of these circumstances that we are faced with. And then there's need to explain this terrible philosophy, this concept of racism that really has been a toxic compilation of ideas that have shaped the world since then. And all of us are trying to make sense of all of this. Those of us in this movement, we have no intention of adding to that. In fact, our concept is how to diffuse it, how to remove it, how to get rid of it, how how to build a human civilization in this 21st century that is embracive of human diversity, that is prepared to confront the historical past with all of its evils, and to build a better world for all of us. Of course, you and I, we are all now at the age we are parents, we are grandparents. So now we are looking beyond our own times to see what kind of world is going to be out there for the younger generations. I have a special circumstance of returning from Ethiopia 10 years ago, and my son meeting me at the airport and saying, well, Dad, I have good news, and I have better news, but they're for noting. The first thing is that you have a granddaughter. She was born this morning. The second thing is that her name is Hilary. And I objected, and I was told, it is for noting. Just 2 weeks ago, I said to her, she's now 8 years old, and I said to her, I'm so sorry that you have to carry the burden of this name. And when you become a teenager, you will have to negotiate how to get around this. And she comforted me. She says, Granddad, don't worry about it. When I become a teenager, you are going to be obsolete. And I said, are you sure that's the right word, obsolete? She said, yes, like the dinosaurs, gone and never to be seen again. And I said, you mean extinct? She said, well, that as well. So she has now decided she wants to be an historian, and when she grows up, she wants to be an historian, and thus these conversations will go on and on. But that is perfectly normal, because what I wish to speak about this evening is to say to you two things. One, here we go again. Here we go again. Fast track backwards 180 years. The people in this country were discussing whether slavery was something that we can live with. Can we go forward with this? Is slavery a sin? Is it a crime? Is it evil? It is at the root of our society, and what are we going to do? And there were those who were saying that enough is enough. Time has come, stop it. We always knew it was evil and wicked and sinful. We always knew that. There were enough people in this country who had been saying this for 300 years. But their voices were brushed aside because there were another group of people who thought that this was the quickest way to make a tremendous amount of money, and that an investment in this enterprise was going to yield far more return on capital than if you had bought government stocks, government bills, treasury paper, invest in agriculture, invest in manufacturing of cotton or what have we. This transatlantic project of enslavement was going to yield far more than other outlets for capital. And therefore, here we have it again. Vested interests versus public opinion. A minority of people who were able to connect this enterprise to what became known as the national good. It is in the interest of our country that we maintain this enterprise called slavery. So the voices of the good, the voices of the beautiful were brushed aside. And thus it went on and on and on for 200 years. Now, I was particularly interested in the papers of William Wilberforce because I went to Hull University to study. And as you all know, William Wilberforce was the MP for Hull in the years he dedicated his public life to stopping the slave trade and ending slavery. And I recall in those papers the conversations where the king invited him to the palace and said to him, Mr. Wilberforce, you are sailing very close to the wind. Our economy is dependent upon slavery. Your attempt to abolish the slave trade is going to undermine the economic growth of this country. And I want to warn you, the national interest comes before your moral reflections. Now, and I say, here we go again, because there's nothing I'm going to say to you this evening which is new. We are reliving that historical moment where the people in this country, after profiting from and enduring this enterprise called chattel slavery, reached a moment where they thought enough was enough, and they moved to abolish it. Now, the arguments that are being used today are very similar to the arguments that were used back then, on both sides. Those who wanted slavery to come to an end made some very strong and compelling arguments. They spoke about the immorality of it. They spoke of the injustice of it. They spoke also about the economics of it. And they spoke about race, culture, and civilization. Those who argued for it argued that we have no time for what we call that wimpy mentality. Oh, so moral. What's all this morality nonsense? Morality, morality, morality. It's about business, fool. It's about the economy. Not morality. Morality is for people in wheelchairs who have nothing else to do. This is not about morality. This is about business. It's about how to sustain economic growth, how to build an economy and make sure the capital required is sufficient to do so. So stop all the moralizing and let's be real. Those were all the arguments that were made on both sides. But no one then, with organized power, wanted to listen to the people who really probably mattered most. They enslaved themselves. Britain had, in those conversations of the 1820s and 30s, there were some 800,000 enslaved Africans in the British Empire. About 80% of them were in the Caribbean. We were the heartland of this 800,000 population that had been reduced to the status of property, chattel, and real estate, and therefore not human. But there were always a few people who were asking the question, have we heard what the enslaved people have to say about this? And so Thomas Buxton asked the question. Granville Sharp asked the question. And then Buxton was able to say in the 1820s, when all of this was reaching a pitch, he was able to say, the idea of giving compensation to the enslavers if slavery is ended is the equivalent of compensating a bank robber for robbing the bank. That's what he said in Parliament. How can we do this? The enslaved themselves were sending messages. They were sending messages to the British Parliament. The black community in this country, back then in the 1820s, was populated by some pretty brilliant advocates, public advocates, arguing for the abolition of slavery. And those black voices in this country in the 1820s merged with those white voices who were saying that a bunch of greedy investors and merchants, these were the ones who have brought the country into disrepute. by enforcing the slavery institution upon the culture and the civilization. And therefore, Buxton argued that the enslaved people are the ones who should be compensated. They are the ones who should be empowered with reparations. And he and his friends made all kinds of legal arguments as to why this should be the case. Buxton argued that every human being, everyone is entitled to enjoy the fruits of their labor. That's a philosophical, universal truth. In all civilizations in all the world, people have the right to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Slavery was an appropriation of that right by other people, so that you were alienated and detached from the fruits of your labor. And that was going to accrue to someone else. Those conversations were very robust and very vigorous. And the British Parliament was filled for 10 years with the most exciting debates possible about human nature. In the end, it was decided that, yes, we must end it. We must end it. But the reasons that were given why it should be ended were not reasons with a future. They were not sustainable arguments. The dominant arguments were that it is now too costly to maintain it. The Africans in the Caribbean were in revolt consistently, massive revolts following the Haitian Revolution. Who would have imagined, no one would have imagined, that Barbados, that had not seen a slave rebellion in near 200 years, that Barbados was going to go up in flames in 4 days of island-wide rebellion. Yes, 1,000 enslaved people were massacred in 3 days for fighting for freedom. Then it was Guyana, Demerara, another major rebellion. And finally, Jamaica, 1831, the Samshot Rebellion. And all of these rebellions were led and organized by young people in their teens and their 20s. And they were saying in the Caribbean, enough is enough. If the British government does not want to end this slavery, we will end it ourselves. And so, after the Jamaica Rebellion of 1831, the British Parliament met to discuss what is the state of affairs in the Caribbean. The conclusion: we hold the slave colonies by a thin thread, and only a massive investment in military oppression can keep this system together. The Parliament therefore had a choice. They could vote millions of pounds to massively expand their armies to suppress the enslaved. It would mean that they would require large garrisons in almost every island. It would mean they would have to deploy even more brutal systems of control. Parliament was asked, do you want to bear this cost, or do you just want to abolish the system? That is a conversation that took place in 1833 that led to the vote to stop it. Now, at that stage, the decision had been taken to compensate the slave owners. Why? Because for the first time in British history, the Parliament was getting ready to agree, and the Parliament had been fudging this issue for 200 years. The Privy Council had been fudging the issues. The courts have been fudging the issues. Are black people human beings or not. They were fudging it. But if they had to pay compensation to the slave owners for abolition, then what kind of compensation are they going to pay? Moral compensation? Could not get through the parliament. We had to pay property compensation. And that was the first time in British history that the parliament finally recognized that the enslaved Africans were not human beings at all, but they were property, chattel, and real estate. Hence, the Emancipation Act was a property compensation legislation, which would mean that the Emancipation Act was the most racist piece of legislation ever passed in the British Parliament. A legislation that proceeded on the basis that these people were not human. Hence the crime of denying people the right to their human identity. Now, here we are now speaking about reparatory justice. Again, the enslaved people ask, why are we not being compensated? Why are we not receiving compensation for what has happened to us? The British Parliament took the decision and informed the black community that your emancipation is your compensation. Your emancipation is your reparations. So be silent. Be silent. Take it and go away. But unfortunately, the conversation has gone on and on and on. Here we are again, 150 years later, and we're still at it. What about compensation for the crimes committed against our people, the harm and suffering that continues to this very day? Now, we in the CARICOM Reparations Commission are of the view that we should reach out to that long tradition of opinion in this country that had always known that slavery was a crime, that slavery was immoral, unethical, unchristian, and that it should be repaired. Now, we are also aware that we're up against a headwind. Every week, we open the newspapers and we hear the most terrible things about these reparations people from Caribbean. Some have said that we have come here to break the British Treasury by demanding millions and billions and millions and billions of pounds. And they have tried to discredit consistently what is an ongoing moral and ethical argument. Justice, the right to justice. And some of the arguments are the most extreme and bizarre. We have heard, for example, that black people are not only not entitled to reparations, they're not deserving of it. Where does that come from? Then we hear arguments such as slavery was always legal. There was no crime. You might question that argument, and you might argue, well, who made it legal? Well, we went into the British Parliament and we made it legal. So if we made it legal, it's legal. Doesn't stand up. You cannot deem it to be so, and it is so. Doesn't stand up. Then we have the notion, that everyone has been enslaved, all races and all groups of people have been enslaved at different moments in their history. Well, let's just look at that a little bit. The British invented the concept that became the norm. something called chattel slavery. You might argue that slavery is a form of oppression, and yes, oppression has been a feature of human history. But chattel slavery, we have found no evidence in human history that a group of people who took workers by whatever means, war, invasions, conquest, whatever means, defined them in law as non-human property, and therefore not subject to the laws of society, of community. We've never seen that before. So to say that everybody has gone through slavery and has always been there is really a fudge. It's like saying, well, I have children. The laws give me the power to dominate and control my children. I can tell them, get up and go to bed. They have to go. I can say, eat your greens. They have to eat them. I can say, these are the clothes you're going to wear tomorrow. Put the clothes on and go to school. And those poor little young children are living under an autocratic, totalitarian system of parental power. Well, you can say, well, that's a slavery too. Young people can say, oh, God, we are enslaved by our parents because we have no freedom, we have no rights, we can't do anything, we just have to do what they say. Okay, you can say that. You can say, well, you know, marriage is a kind of slavery in some societies where you marry a man, you have to take his name. If you have property, he takes control of the property, and you're left propertyless and nameless. You can't vote. You can't have a profession. You can't become a doctor, a lawyer. You're just a woman in the house raising babies under the tyrannical authority of a man. You can call that domestic slavery if you wish. There are all kinds of oppression that have been called slavery. But what we are talking about is the new variant, a special form of human oppression that was developed specifically for the African people in the colonies, chattel slavery. And it was codified first in Barbados by the English in 1661, an act for the good governing of Negroes. And it begins with, and whereas the Negroes of Africa have proven to be a bloody and perfidious people, and shall not be subject to the laws governing people of Christian or European descent, blah, 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 blah. And from here on in, they are the property of their purchasers for eternity. So you go to the harbor, and you go to the auction block, and you buy a bunch of enslaved Africans. They are your property forever and ever. You can pass it through the will. And as property, they have all the values. We know what property is. With property, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can lease it, you can mortgage it, you pay taxes on it, you can use it as money, as currency, and it has all of those characteristic features of property. And that is what the 800,000 people were. So we say it was chattel slavery made in Britain. And it was made in Britain for specific reasons. Because you see, the Spanish and the Portuguese had been trying to develop a slavery system in Brazil and Mexico and other places. But they were trying to fudge the Catholic philosophy with the old traditional worlds of treating the poor, treating the propertyless people with a certain degree of respect. So the Spanish and Portuguese were mucking around with, okay, we will Christianize our slaves. They have to go to church on Sundays. They can have children, and the children must be baptized. They can get married under the church, and they can have a little family. And the Spanish and Portuguese were trying their best to humanize this slavery thing. They tried their best. they were not making any money out of it. They were not making no money out of it. Then came the English into the Caribbean. They saw an opportunity. Sugar production, the most lucrative commodity, agricultural commodity in the world. And there was this entrepreneurial opportunity of taking islands and converting them into sugar plantations to supply the world market with sugar. Everybody wanted sugar, not only the households. If you want to make good beer, you need sugar. Whatever you want to make chemicals, you need sugar. You want to make chocolate, you need sugar. You want to make dyes, you need sugar. Whatever you needed in your household, sugar, sugar, sugar. The demand was insatiable. So you do the calculation. If I go to Africa, if I can get my hands on some slaves, ship them across the Atlantic. A slave ship took about 8 weeks from West Africa to the Caribbean. In those 8 weeks of shipment, what you want to do is to make sure that as many of them reach the market as possible. So you recognize you might lose 20% of them because of disease and all kinds of things on the ship, mental disorder of the enslaved. So you run your numbers. Can I make a profit? Can I bring them on the plantation, work them to death in a period of 10 years, work them to death, maximize my sugar production, get my sugar on the boat, get it out to the British and European market, and can I make a profit? Can I make more than I would have made if I had invested in a wheat farm at home or whatever? It was the latest bonanza, and it was irresistible to people who had money, and they invested, and Barbados became the experiment. This is where the experiment started. Thus, they were the ones who came up with this idea that African peoples should be classified as property and not human in the laws, because that meant that you can do with them whatever you wish. You can do with them whatever you wish. It was total control over your asset. Thus, how can you rape an enslaved woman? You can't rape property. So there can't be a law to say that rape is wrong because she's property. You can't rape property. It's an asset. So total and complete control of one group of people by another group of people, thus the relationship between slavery and genocide. The British brought 3 million Africans into the Caribbean. 3 million. Into tiny Barbados, they brought 600,000. And then we have all the documentation, all the shipments, captain logs, all the reports. We have all that information. 600,000. At emancipation, there were 83,000 left. How do you reduce 600,000 people to 83,000 over 200 years? Less than 20% survival. Jamaica, 1.3 million were deposited in Jamaica. At emancipation, there were 300,000 left. So what we are looking at is not just slavery. We're looking at genocide. Now, I must share with you that when we sit at home in front of our screens and we watch the situation in Gaza, we watch it. And the argument is that a group of desperate Palestinians committed a crime against seemingly innocent people. And the result of that is a massacre of tens of thousands. Well, we have seen that movie before. In the Caribbean, if 100 enslaved Africans burnt the house of an enslaver, damaged his crops, the slave owners would get together. And after they have identified who they believe were the leaders, let's say it's 15, 20 people, they would then massacre 500 people. So the reaction was always in extreme proportion to the demographics of the situation. So we're watching this circumstance, and what is it reminding us of? I'm thinking, this is exactly the Caribbean experience. A small group of people taking an action against an oppressive situation, and the result is the massacre of men, women, children, babies. The modern world have learned something from the history. And I can tell you, everything I have seen taking place in terms of the government's response, the Israeli response to the situation in Gaza, we have seen that in the Caribbean over and over and over. So there's a continuation of this kind of narrative. So what I'm suggesting to you, therefore, is this. We believe that this country has within it the ethical and moral dimensions to address this matter of reparatory justice and to treat it as an enlightenment, not to treat it as an economic calculation, but to realize that this is a crime that was so large. And I sat in the House of Lords in the gallery in 2007 when the country was celebrating the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. And the House of Lords concluded, okay, the crime was so large, it was so global, because from Barbados, it moved to the Leeward Islands, Antigua, St. Kitts, then it moved to Jamaica, then it moved from Jamaica into South Carolina, and from South Carolina it spread to the entire US South. So beginning as a profitable model on a small island, it then became global. And so the conclusion was, the crime is so large, you cannot possibly settle it. It cannot be settled, it's just too large. How do you even contemplate bringing justice to a crime of that magnitude? It's not possible. And therefore, the best thing to do is to brush it under the carpet and let's move along. Okay, fine. That's a discourse. But another group of people said, as they had said 100 years earlier, how are you going to brush our history under the carpet? If it's your carpet, you can try, but we don't have a carpet to brush our history under. We want to talk about it. Let's find a strategy to negotiate. And so CARICOM governments have asked us on the Commission, develop a strategy for a conversation with the British people and with the British government. Now, of course, that is a difficult project, but we started out to do so. We said, here are the dimensions. What we would like to do is for the British to accept some responsibility for what they have done in the Caribbean. Now, we are in the third phase of this. The first phase, as I said, was emancipation. The second phase was independence. We had the same conversation in the 1960s when these colonies decided they wanted to become independent and they want to become nations. And the leaders all came to London to sit with the British government to say, well, okay, we're becoming independent and you need to help us with some basic tools and infrastructure. How can you build a nation if 80% of the people are illiterate? And so the Jamaicans said to the British government, Prime Minister, Premier Sir Alexander Bustamante, you have control, you have owned Jamaica for 300 years. Now we're going to become a country. We need some help with some schools and some hospitals, some roads and bridges, some equipment for agriculture. We need some help as we transition. The dominant political response here was, if you want independence, you can have it, but you're on your own, and we owe you nothing. We owe you nothing. You're on your own. Go and do what you want to do. Now, I believe that the people of the West Indies have done a magnificent job in converting colonies of exploitation into stable societies. And critically, these people who were colonized, they became attached to democracy. So we're going to use democracy. We're not going to use fascism. We're not going to use totalitarianism. We're not even going to use communist methodology. We're going to transition as democracies. And we need your help to assist us to consolidate that situation. Nope. You want independence? You're on your own. We owe you nothing. And so you can very well imagine how much further along these Caribbean islands would have been if Britain had said, okay, we will work with you on the strategy of development. We will work with you on infrastructure. We will work with you on building what Eric Williams came here for. Eric Williams came here from Trinidad to say, well, help us to build some industrial parks, because we want to take some of these young people out of agriculture and put them into manufacturing to build a modern society. I have a development plan to build some industrial parks, to create factories, to manufacture domestic goods, and so on. We need some assistance. Nada. So each step along the way, the momentum has been increasing. Emancipation came, the enslaved got nothing. Independence came 100 years later, got nothing. And now we are in the final conversation, reparatory justice. And the question is asked, well, why have you brought this before us now? Well, they could not bring it until now, because even though emancipation came in the 1830s, Britain remained a sovereign power. You could not bring a litigation, a reparatory justice claim against a sovereign nation. We had to wait till the majority of our islands became independent with their own constitution, their own parliaments, their own sovereignty, and then at that moment you could say to other sovereign nations, we need to have a conversation about mutual economic development. And this is what we have done. Now, I read in the press here how the view seems to be that this is about an attempt to extract wealth and value and money out of the British state and the British citizens. Well, I don't know anything about that. What I do know is that we would rather sit down with the British state and present to them our strategy for human development, our strategy to eradicate poverty. We have the greatest percentage of chronic disease carriers in the Caribbean in the world among the adult population, as you know. 60% of all the black people in the Caribbean over the age of 60 are diabetic or hypertensive. Again, this turbulent history, well, you know, the thing about sugar, And the philosophy is that you must eat what you produce, right? And for 400 years, we produced sugar. And therefore, we ate it. We overate it. In this country, you use sugar as a sweetener. For us, it was a meal. We ate sugar as a meal. We ate it. When you were hungry, you ate sugar. And that is our history. And now the black people of the Caribbean are all addicted to sugar, and they cannot metabolize it, and we have this super pandemic of type 2 diabetes ripping through the region. Now, these are issues that require discussion. And so we say, listen, in our universities, we have the science to get around this. We know what is causing this. We have the science. But do we have the technology? We don't have the super technology to do the kind of research and diagnosis that we need to do. Now, how do we do that? Why can't we partner on a healthcare strategy? Why can't the British pharmaceutical industry and the state partner with Caribbean people to resolve this crisis? And we can go on and on and on. And what the CARICOM plan is calling for is a summit to discuss these matters. A summit for mutual development. A summit that would negotiate what this will look like. This is what the CARICOM strategy is about. But there is an element in this country today that has sought to demonize what is the objective of CARICOM. In much the same way that they sought to demonize emancipation. Now, they said, well, if we free the black people, all they will do is sit around under coconut trees and have parties every day. Well, let me tell you this. Black people at emancipation were entitled to party for 100 years. If you have gone through slavery for 400 years, what we should have done, the black people should have said, from now on, from today, it's party time. And we should party and party for 100 years because we had a right to do that after what we've gone through. But no, we went back to work. We went back to work for the plantations. And the plantations were complaining that we were not working as hard as we were during slavery. Where in slavery you had to work 20 hours a day, and the idea was to work you to death and replace you. The freedom was despised. And some of the finest intellectuals in this country jumped on that bandwagon and wrote the most racist things about black people. I mean, I had to study as a student the writings of Thomas Carlyle. I had to read the historical works of Thomas Froude from Oxford University. And it is nothing but rabid, racist, anti-human literature. So when I see the elements of that again today in the media, the same kind of arguments again after 100 years, the racism, the anti-humanity, and the degradation of the identity of black people, you have to ask yourself the question, why are these racist ideas so persistent? Why are they ongoing, generation after generation after generation, the same arguments over and over again, despite the evidence to show that these ideas are not true? And so we have come to this country from the Caribbean as a commission, speaking on behalf of our governments, to say, listen, we are here out of respect. Most of us on this commission, like myself, we grew up here. I was a Windrush baby. I came here when I was 12 years old. I went to high school here. I went to university here. When I finished my studies, I returned to the Caribbean to contribute to education. Now, there are many of us here, all professional people, who have lived and grown up in this country. We therefore have no reason to have any rage or anger or vexation towards the people of this nation. What we do know is that there is a conversation that we can have, and now we are calling it a new enlightenment. An enlightenment. An age of reason. An age where humanity can speak to itself on a moral platform. Where humanity can say, listen, these crimes have been committed, okay. Let us deal with them and let us move on. Let us make sure that the 10 years in the future are better than the 10 years of the past. And we can do it. We can do it. And this is what the reparatory justice movement is about. Identifying how we can work through mutual strategies for mutual benefits. I am very concerned about the educational standards in the Caribbean. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the university. Therefore, I preside over the higher education system of the Caribbean. And I can see all of the problems. I can see the financial challenges associated with whether this system is fit for transforming the economies and societies. And I have come to one conclusion. The Caribbean cannot achieve sustainable economic development on the basis of its own energy and its own resources. It's clear to me. The region has not had sustained economic growth in 30 years. In the last 30 years, the Caribbean has not been able to achieve sustained economic growth. Some islands will have 2-3%, they would fall back. They would have 3%, they would fall back. We're talking about sustained growth. But yet, the people remain committed to justice, democracy. Many of you go to Barbados on holiday. Barbados was the home of slavery. This is where it started, chattel slavery. But the same people of Barbados have made a vow. A vow. This island was the home of chattel slavery. And therefore, we are going to convert it into the freest society the world has ever seen. That is what the people who have gone through slavery have committed themselves to. We would not reproduce that. We are going to uproot all of those legacies of anger and hate and racism. We're going to uproot it, throw it out, and we're going to make the Caribbean a free place. A free place, a zone of peace. That's what our prime ministers have all said. The Caribbean must be a zone of peace where everyone can live and live in freedom. That is our commitment as a civilization. So we have carved out of slavery a culture of peace and a culture of freedom. That is our contribution to humanity. And it must not be underestimated. It must not be underestimated how the victims can become the philosophers of the future. So when you go to the Caribbean islands on holiday, bear in mind that you'll go into a space where the descendants of the enslaved have crafted a society where everyone can feel at peace and at rest. So against that background, we are here to talk about how we can negotiate a social justice program, how we can look at the challenges in the region. Climate change is a big issue. The hurricanes are getting more powerful by the year. How can we help to build resilient communities? Most of the people in the Caribbean live in little wooden houses. Why do you think they live in little wooden houses? These are the descendants of the slaves. The poverty. They live in little wooden houses. We call them chattel houses. They live in these little huts made of wood. And God forbid a hurricane goes through. And this is what has happened in Jamaica. The hurricane went through the western half of Jamaica, where the plantations were, where the people live in little wooden houses. In the eastern part of Jamaica, where there's Kingston and corporate development, the modern Jamaica, it's all there on the eastern side. The western side is the old plantation world. And all of those structures are blown to the wind. So, the human destruction there is a logical result of the history of the island. It's the workers, the descendants, the property-less people living in little structures because of the history of slavery and making them the most vulnerable. Are we going to rebuild those houses of wood and let them wait for the next hurricane? Or do we need a build-back structure where investors in this country can meet with the governments and the private sector in the Caribbean and build sustainable housing for the working people of the Caribbean? They have a right. That's the kind of thing we want to talk about. Mutual projects for sustainable development on both sides. And I would end with this observation. We're all supposed to be rational human beings, and we all have a sense of a moral compass. We all know what's good for humanity. We all know these things. But somehow, when it comes to making strategic decisions, we bury our heads in the sand and says, it's not about me. My ancestors did not enslave black people. Nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me. I wasn't there. That was 100, 200 years ago. It wasn't me. Yeah. But you enjoy the benefits of being the world's first industrial nation, the world's first society with a welfare state, and these were all the benefits that have come down historically. So yes, all of us are in this together. All of us are in this together. It's not a question of when you were born. It's a question of the benefits that have come to you as a result of certain historical decisions that were made. So we're all in this together. So I would urge you then, colleagues, when you pick up your Sunday paper and you read about this castigation of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and its call for reparatory justice, I would ask you to reflect upon that. Reflect upon it. And ask yourself, is there something we can do to bring this conversation to a closure? It's not going to go away. It's just going to get larger and larger. Why don't we act now proactively and say, this is an enlightenment movement. It's an enlightenment moment. Let us do this for a better day for all of us. I thank you. I would like to invite my colleagues from the CARICOM Reparations Commissions to please come and join me up here and answer all the hard questions. So those of you who are mic'd up, please come. Our colleague from the Bahamas, Grenada, Guyana, and if someone would come here, I would sit there and I've done my bit. So yes, if you have any questions, please put them to my colleagues. As you know, how we have organized the CARICOM Reparations Commission, there is a regional reparations commission. But to enable that to function, each country has its own national reparations committee. So these are our colleagues who are the leaders of the national reparations committees. So they are working feverishly in their countries, building consciousness, developing programs, helping to bring global awareness to some of the problems. So they are all soldiers out there in their respective countries. My task as the chairman of the regional commission is to coordinate all of the activities that are taking place in each Caribbean society. So, colleagues, if you have any questions, colleagues and friends, any questions, we will take them, and we will do our very best.
We're going to try and take 3 questions at a time, so if I can see a few other hands. Okay, I see 1, 2, 3, thank you. And if you could say who you are and what organisation you're representing, thank you.
Okay. I'm Judy Richards, Global African Congress. I'm the co-chair at international level, general secretary at UK level. And I'm not going to do my usual speech about my name can't really possibly be Judy Richards because I'm the descendant of an enslaved person. I think the hatred has not gone away. It was just hidden and has come back to the fore for some reason. But the question I wanted to ask was, last year, the UK was examined by the UN Committee on the Elimination of Race Discrimination. They were told by that committee that they should consider apologising for enslavement and that they should talk to the communities, especially reparations organisations, about reparations. And I'm wondering if you are taking that on board in the work that you're doing in trying to get them to actually talk to you, because they've got to report back to the UN committee in about 4 years' time.
Eric, you want to take that?
Could I see that hand again, please?
Okay.
Hello, Alex Mabanta, he, him pronouns. I'm a student at University College London. I'm from California. And in California, I was part of a Students for Reparations network. My question is, what models are you using for national reparations? As my state of California has piloted a statewide reparations for Black Californians, and I wanted to know what models you were looking at for how reparations would come throughout the Caribbean.
My name is Paul Felix. I'm the director of London Wide, which is an online internet radio station. I'm very much involved with education as a mature student at one of the leading universities in this country. Glasgow University has put forward a program whereby they are financing a master's degree in reparations justice or something like that. But it seems to be the only university that has decided to address this issue from an educational point of view. Can we put pressure on the various administrations in this country to ensure that the practical side of reparations involve the educational sector? Thank you.
Okay. You want me to take the Glasgow?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, we have heard about the report, but we have not been approached. What we're doing in CARICOM is reaching out to the diaspora, because the global movement has to be understood holistically. We have sovereign states in Africa and the Caribbean, and they have a view and issues associated with being sovereign states. Then we have the diaspora living in Europe that are faced with different issues of discrimination, economic marginalization, etc. And what we've been doing is working with the diaspora to make sure that we have a holistic global movement. Just last month, we were in The Hague, where we hosted Afro-descendants, that's what we are calling ourselves, from 11 European countries, teaching them and sharing information with them about the CARICOM 10-point plan. And we were trying to understand the issues facing them. Afrophobia, for example, is a big issue in The Hague. So with that in mind, we are helping to work with our diaspora groups so that when their governments face CERD or the United Nations and have these issues, that we can partner with them in trying to solve that problem. So we await our diaspora working with us so that we can approach SWORD collectively, together with the Africa Union. Our global movement has also gone into Latin America. We've been working in Brazil, we've been working in Costa Rica, we've been working in Mexico, and now with the Africa Union on board, we're looking at a global reparations movement that deals with a range of issues, from sovereign state issues of our 10-point plan to the specific issues in the UK, in Holland, that are somewhat different from the sovereign state issues of underdevelopment. So that's how we're approaching it. Thank you.
Yes, I can. With regards to the model that was asked about from the student from California, as Professor Beckles pointed out, what we have developed in the Caribbean is a socioeconomic plan, which you will hear us refer to as a 10-point plan, whereby the resources that we and the assistance that we seek as part of this reparative justice package is not for our individual pockets, so to speak. So that when we speak about healthcare and we speak about the partnership to address the issues of the chronic health issues that we have in the Caribbean, we speak of diabetes and hypertension and so on. We speak about the partnership to treat with that. We speak about education and the access of Caribbean students to access tertiary education. Because coming after independence, the fact that, even primary and secondary school education was a challenge for our students. And of course, we speak of the psychological harm which was caused by not just transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Let us not forget, for instance, the issue of indigenous genocide and the challenges that we had with our first peoples, our first settlers. So that we speak with regards to that, and of course climate change issues, which we have witnessed, and we do not need Hurricane Melissa to remind us. So the strategy and the model that we have adopted and that we are sharing with you, and we are at pains to point out all of the time that we are not here meeting in London, and we do not have container ships on the port to put hard cash from the Treasury of Britain to carry back with us in the Caribbean. But what we seek is an engagement, is a discussion, is a conversation, is a summit, as Professor Beckles said, so that we can have that engagement to address the harm which was caused by the crimes against humanity which we speak about.
I will just add to what Arley was saying about the 10-point plan, is that we are revising the plan. So if you were to go to the CARICOM website right now, the plan that you would find would not be the one that is about to come out very soon. One of the things that has been updated in regards to the plan are issues of gender. So looking specifically at the harms that were endured by women and girls in the transatlantic slave trade, noting that one of the things that made this specific slavery so unique was that it was the only time, or it was the first time, that you could be born into slavery and die a slave based on the status of your mother. So these are some of the things that we are highlighting in the new plan and hope to share. And it's the plan, but it will also be more of a manifesto. So it will flesh out some of the issues that we have already addressed as well.
Thank you. In respect of the Glasgow University project, yes, it is understood that universities played a critical role in the development and the sustainability of the slavery system. As an educator, we are all fully aware of these issues. To demonstrate that slavery was profitable from a business perspective, the professors of economics and finance in most British universities wrote papers and did their research to illustrate to the slave owners how they can make return on capital and why they can make more on this enterprise than in any other. The professors of theology wrote extensively about the legitimacy of slavery, because the church and all of its manifestations, the Christian church, have all endorsed slavery on the basis that black people were less endowed with human capacity than other peoples, and therefore enslaving them was not a breach of any Christian or theological perspective. So yes, the schools of divinity all came on board. The lawyers all stepped up. The professors of law stepped up to legitimize the notion of human property and property rights in human beings, and they provided their research and literature to enforce contracts, to enforce all kinds of adjudications in relation to slavery. So slavery could not have gone on without that research and professorial input from all of the relevant disciplines of academia. Now, the universities know all that. Glasgow wanted very much to become a leading medical school in Europe. It certainly was up there, and it wanted to get out front. So they involved themselves in relations with the slave traders, so that the Glasgow slave traders would supply bodies to the medical school. Students were placed as interns on the slave ships, because you must remember, if the slave trader has an interest in reducing mortality. So you're going to leave West Africa with 400 Africans jammed into the ship. You want to get to market. Eventually they realized that each slave ship should have a medical intern, so that if the symptoms of some infection or disease was about to ravish the humans, they would identify the symptoms, and they would say, well, this one here, this coughing and sneezing, red eyes and vomiting and so on, we think this is malaria. And phew, off you go. So the captains of slave ships came to depend very heavily on the diagnosis and the judgments of medical students, their interns. And I can tell you that we have available to us some of the medical notes of these students. And today, professors are now able to say, hold on a second. Those symptoms were not yellow fever or malaria. Those were classical symptoms of stress. And all they wanted was some water and a little more peace, and they would have survived the journey. So a lot of healthy people were thrown into the ocean. And as a result of these conversations, so, you know, the universities were all involved, and we called upon them to identify their relationships to this slavery system. And many of them did. They all did their research. They found, yes, that they were investing in slavery. They found that they were providing the resources to allow slavery to function. They got endowments from slave owners. Glasgow University was the favorite university for the Jamaican slave owners. The Jamaican slave owners wanted their sons to have a medical degree, and they would send them to Glasgow for their medical education. And in return, they would give the university great grants and endowments. So it's all intertwined. However, most universities that have done their internal research and have found that they were deeply embedded in the economics and academics of slavery, they've backed away from it. They've done the research, and then they backed away. So we call this research and run. So that's the concept we have used. So most British universities have gone into research and run. They collect the data, their own libraries are filled with it, and they say, oh my God, we were so embedded in this thing, and they zoop, don't want to talk about it anymore. Glasgow, however, said, okay, no. Glasgow said, no, we want to do something about this. And the Vice-Chancellor and his team, we met in Glasgow, we met in Jamaica, they came down, and we said to them, listen, our main concern is reversing this type 2 diabetes pandemic. We need to reverse this. We know the science. We don't have the state-of-the-art laboratories to do the kind of clinical work that we need to do so that we could prevent the further spread of it. So Glasgow agreed and said, listen, let us sign an MOU and we will work on this together. We will work on public health pandemics together. And we will invest 20 million pounds over a decade. We would invest 20 million pounds to work jointly. And so far we are on track. I'm very impressed with the work that has been done between our professors and their professors. We have a joint institute called the Glasgow University of the West Indies Institute for Public Health Research. And bringing those professors together to work on these chronic diseases is magnificent. And on top of that, we agreed to also deliver a master's program in reparatory justice. So Glasgow and University of the West Indies came together to teach online to the world a master's degree, an MA in reparatory justice, which is taught jointly by Glasgow professors and Caribbean professors. And the first cohort of those master's students graduated this summer. And they're from all over the place. So this is how universities can come together to do mutually beneficial work on reparatory justice. So the Glasgow issue has become a model for many other universities to follow.
Ryan, thank you. I had a hand up here earlier, and I think there was a hand up at the front, so I can take one more over here. And also a request to the panel from the floor. Would you mind introducing yourself? Because aside from Sir Hilary, people aren't clear on the actual context and who you are. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Segmet Judah, and I'm here representing RTAG, which is Reparations to This African Generation. I want to thank Professor Hilary Beckles for a very informative presentation and for all of the hard work that he's been doing for some considerable time. I've also been, obviously not doing as much as Sir Hilary Beckles, but I have been within the grassroots here in London, having been educated by initially Bernie Grant about reparations. And so in light of what has been said about expanding the campaign, how important is it for us here that with the Rastafari Movement UK originally having a march on the 1st of August that had over 5,000 black people in attendance and has continued, how can we in the grassroots work with CARICOM so that we can see, for example, there are people now that perhaps would never have talked about reparations previously because it's there now in the public domain. They're willing to talk about it. However, I think the need for reparatory justice workshops is critically important because, as you were explaining, there's so much information that people need to learn about, i.e. the CARICOM 10-point plan. There's also the history of the reparations movement here in Britain. And with the Church of England, with respect, whilst they are starting to do their initiatives, I really think that we need safe black spaces where black people can come together and talk about reparations with our understanding and our perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Wish to go? Eric, you want to go? Arley? Anybody? Yeah, I mean, okay.
Okay, my name's Emma Sirius. I just wondered, how are you going to link with all the other reparations parties? Like there's a parliamentary party in the UK as well with Bell, Addy. are you going to join together? Because obviously it would be more powerful if everyone spoke with one voice.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm Alan Lester. I'm a Professor of Historical Geography at the University of Sussex and a historian of the British colonialism. I just wanted to draw attention to one aspect of the story that, Sir Hilary, you were saying about the relationship between Britain and the Caribbean that might provide an opportunity, because it's a hidden part of the story, that during World War II, Britain passed a series of colonial welfare and development acts, largely to maintain loyalty among black Caribbean people during the Second World War, in which they actually promised development aid, nowhere near reparative justice. But if you look in total at what was promised, not just in the form of loans, but also grants, it amounts to about £3 billion that was promised and never delivered after World War II. It was never delivered largely because it was up to white colonial officials to decide what projects they wanted to apply for, and they generally didn't bother. But there has been a moment in that British relationship with the Caribbean where a responsibility for welfare and for development has been recognised, and the Treasury has committed funds. It's just that they've never been delivered. I wonder if that's an opportunity to tell that story as part of getting the conversation going again.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. My name is Eric Phillips. I am the chair of the Guyana Reparations Committee and the vice chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Coming to your point about working with the diaspora, as I mentioned last month, we met for 2 days in The Hague. Sister Esther from the UK had a delegation of 6 individuals. So we're now working with Sister Esther to see how we could harmonize not only what we would like to work together on, but the issues. Because some of the issues in the UK are different than the issues that we're dealing with in CARICOM. But they're all African issues. And so we are hoping soon to meet with Sister Esther. We're meeting with the all-party parliamentary group, I think, before we leave. Tomorrow. But tomorrow. But we're reaching out now into the diaspora. And our latest 10-point plan deals with those issues. It not only deals now with women and violence against women, but it's now dealing with the diaspora, as we're now working with the Africa Union. We're also working with Colombia. For example, Vice President Marquez worked for 2 years with Pope Francis on an apostolic exhortation for an apology. I was part of that group. He died. And so now we're working with Pope Leo to get that apology. There was an apology for indigenous genocide, but never an apology for African slavery. That all has to do with issues related to the diaspora. So the time has come for us now to get more involved with the diaspora. We did it last month. There were Africans or Afro-descendants from 11 European countries in The Hague. We had a declaration. CARICOM is adopting it. And we're now looking for mechanisms to work more closely together.
Very good.
My name is Arley Gill. I'm the chairman of the Grenada National Reparations Committee and a member of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And just to embellish what Eric said, that is one of the reasons we are here. One of the reasons we're here is to have this sharing with the diaspora so that we can hear from you, how is it that we can partner with the different organizations here in the United Kingdom. And just listening to the professor from Sussex University, I believe, it'll be interesting if you can tell the story for us about the Second World War, so that rather than us come here to recite that story, so that the persons that Professor spoke about earlier do not think that we come from more trillions, you see, so that you can assist us in assisting us in telling that story. And not so much, and not only are we engaging the English-speaking Caribbean, but we have done considerable amount of work with the Dutch Caribbean. The CARICOM has engaged the African Union. Then we have issues to deal with respect to the French Caribbean. And let us not forget for 1 minute the issue of decolonization. We still have colonies in the Caribbean, yes? So that while we speak from independent islands now, let us not forget our Caribbean brothers and sisters who are still colonies, whether it's French colonies, Dutch colonies, American colonies that we still have in the Caribbean. So that what I find personally is that as we continue to do this work, is that it seems as though it's becoming a little more complex, more complicated, different layers of engagement and issues that we have to confront from day to day. So that, in a nutshell as well, we are looking towards you here in the UK to help us to clarify some of the issues of misinformation that we find coming through the press and so on and so forth with regards to our objectives for coming here to begin with.
Let me share with you what we did in Holland, because the Prime Minister apologized on the 19th of December 22. The King apologized on the 1st of July 23. CARICOM visited the Netherlands. We spent 30 man days there working with local groups. We've set up an associate member National Reparations Committee in the Netherlands. We worked for 30 days to create a legal document for the apology so it can be passed in Parliament, and we're now engaged with them. So that is a model we'd like, because France is different than Holland, different than Britain, so we have to work through those issues. But we do have a model. We also helped to launch the North American Reparations Committee. We helped to launch the Colombian Reparations Committee. We were just in Brazil last week in 2 conversations. We're going to Algeria at the end of the month. We're going to Togo in December, all trying to spread the word about how we can work together as a global Africa, dealing with reparations, dealing with slavery, dealing with, of course, colonization. And I think we have to recast the conversation, because the conversation has been controlled. For example, slavery was the first nuclear bomb. We have to think about it like that. It tried to destroy Africa and African people. Racism is the second nuclear bomb, because that's the legacy that's left today that's disintegrating African communities. So we were looking at it, we're changing the narrative, we're forming partnerships all over Latin America with the AU and now in Europe.
I think, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell Dean. I'm chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Committee. I think the only thing that I'd want to add to that is the importance of these partnerships, because you're hearing all of this work, understanding that these are not our day jobs. I'm an associate professor of psychology at the University of the Bahamas. So the work that we do with the CARICOM Reparations Committee is volunteer work. With that, I'd like to also recognize Dr. Hilary Brown, who does amazing feats of organization for the committee, and Ambassador David Kamasang, who also has done amazing work in setting up the groundwork for reparations within the region. So the partnerships and the leadership that you have here, we're really looking to expand upon that, because these are, we need the help in building up what we're doing. Yeah.
If I may add on the reference in respect to the Rastafarian people. The Rastafarians reside at the heart of any conversation about reparatory justice. In the 20th century, they were the ones who were out there on the vanguard making the point, we are stolen people. We are Africans who were stolen, kidnapped, put on slave ships, deposited in the Caribbean. And as stolen people, we have a right to return from where we were taken. And the Rastafarians have maintained that position all along, that they're not immigrants. They are persons who are being stolen and kidnapped, and they have a right to return. And those who kidnap them and drag them across the Atlantic should finance their resettlement back home. They want to go back home. So that concept of identity and of the future have enlivened and enlightened what this movement is all about. So when many Africans in the diaspora were ashamed because of the history to proclaim their African identity and to proclaim their commitment to African values and civilizations. The Rastafarians were the ones who were doing it. They were the ones who were constantly saying, we are Africans, that's who we are. We have a culture and we want to be able to live that culture. We are not in the West, we are stranded here, and we want to get back from whence we came. So that perception becomes part of the infrastructure of what is a reparations movement. In respect of the situation with the British government after the Second World War, well, you know, the evidence around those commitments are clear. The Colombo Plan took center stage. So the Caribbean people came here and committed themselves to the defeat of the Nazis. They joined the army. They fought bravely on all the frontiers of that European Civil War, and they did the best they could. And I remember when I was a child in Barbados, there was a man in my village whose name was Hitler. And we couldn't figure out why is a man in our village carrying the name of Hitler. Hitler is a German name, it's not an English name. Why do we have, it's not an African name, it's not an English name, so why is this man called Hitler? And eventually I got my grandfather to explain to me what actually happened. And in the war, a British delegation came to Barbados and they went through the villages and they were recruiting young men to join the army and come to England and go on the European front. And this was the same across the Caribbean. Groups came, they would interview young men, examine their physical health, and ask them if they want to join the British Army and go to Europe and fight the Nazis. And this one young man, my grandfather said, he looked at all of the young men who were lined up to sign up in the British Army, and he said to them, listen, you guys don't get it, do you? You're fighting on the wrong side. The Germans didn't enslave us. The Germans didn't colonize us. It's the British who colonized us. It's the British who enslaved us. So why are you fighting on that side? You should be fighting on the other side. And he was branded Hitler for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life, all the people in the village called him Hitler. And he never got over that. But what happened after the war was Britain gave primacy to its East Indian colonies. The commitments it had made to its West Indian colonies were abandoned, and they gave commitments to the East Indian colonies. Because, you know, here's Britain with the West Indian colonies, the East Indian colonies, what was then, you know, India, Sri Lanka, Singapore, and all of the Asian spaces. And they met in Colombo in 1949 and again 1953, and they worked through a reparations development package for the East Indian colonies. Sri Lanka, India, Malaysia, all of those countries received a package for development from the British government. And we were left saying, well, the West Indies were your first colonies. This is where you made a tremendous amount of wealth from slavery and plantations and so on. Why are you ignoring the West Indies and making these significant development investments in the East Indies? Well, their answer was very clear. There were two answers, in fact. One was, we're very upset with the West Indians. We're very upset with you because in the 1930s, all of you West Indian colonies demonstrated and went into the streets with weapons to fight against the British Empire. And that's what you all did. In Belize, then St. Kitts, then through Antigua, down to Barbados, then Trinidad, and finally Jamaica, all of these colonies were saying the end of empire, the end of colonization, independence for our people. And successive British governments were very unhappy that the West Indians were accused of being those who brought down the British Empire. Because remember, once the West Indians had revolted against the British Empire in the 30s, India revolted against the British Empire in the 40s, Ghana and Africa revolted against the empire in the 50s. So their calculation was in the British government, successive parties, that the West Indian Rebellion was the one that triggered the collapse of the British Empire. First the West Indies, then India, then Africa, and block by block it began to tumble. So that when the West Indians came here to discuss development support in the 60s, the parliamentary anger towards the West Indian was palpable, and it's there in the records. You can read it for yourself. But at the same time, they saw the East Indies as a future source of development for them. So Britain moved to invest in the East Indies to support Sri Lanka, to support India, Malaysia, and all of the colonies in the East Indies. And those countries began to grow and develop and expand. And Britain was looking after its interests as creating future markets for their manufacturers. They saw the West Indies by then. The West Indies were seen as a burden, and a troublesome burden at that, while the East Indies were seen as future economic partners for development. So we saw a clear contrast between how they treated their West Indian colonies and the East Indian colonies. So all they really wanted to do with the West Indian colonies is play cricket with us. That's all they wanted to do, play cricket with us. They wanted us to come to England and entertain them on the cricket field. But with the East Indies, they were making serious strategic moves, railways, hospitals, building universities, agricultural reform. It was a massive investment. And critically, the British government was able to persuade the Americans to join with them in the transformation of the East Indies from colonies into nation states. So, you know, there is this narrative of what we call the persistent ill treatment of the West Indies that were their first major colonies and the source of their historic wealth.
We are getting very close to time, and there are hands all over the room. So I'm going to start at the front. And if we start with 3, and if we can go quite quickly, and then we'll see what we're left with. Does that sound okay? So I think you had your hand up.
Anthony Severin, High Commissioner of St. Lucia. We have been using 2 terms interchangeably. We speak of reparations, and then we speak of reparatory justice. We know that these 2 terms have different resonances. Of course, we know the implications of those terms. In this country, there seems to be a preference, particularly among the media, for the term reparations. They seize upon that, and of course the implications for finance and the treasury and all of that. Could you expound on the use of those 2 terms? The commission started off as a reparations commission, but right now your mandate is more leaning towards reparatory justice. In fact, that is the term we use now. So perhaps you could expound on the use of those 2 terms.
Well, I will take a crack at that. You know, you remember that conversation between Humpty Dumpty and Alice? When Humpty Dumpty said, you know, a word mean what I want it to mean, no more, no less. And Alice said, well, surely a word must have an objective meaning so that everyone would understand what is meant by that word. And Humpty Dumpty says, no, 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 no. It depends on who's the master. Power is the right to define your reality and force other people to accept your definition of it. You cannot get away from all of that. When in the United States, for example, in the 1960s and 70s, and black people were talking about black power. And that concept of black power resonated through the country and the world. What black people meant by black power, what they meant was, we want jobs, we want the right to vote, we want to set up businesses in our own communities, we want to have access to banking loans, we want to own businesses, we want to get involved in entrepreneurial development, we want the right to function as business people with economic power. That's what they meant. But the right-wing media in America, the right-wing media said, black power, okay, we know what you mean by that. You black guys want to marry white women. That's what you mean. You want to integrate with us because you want to marry white women. And they used that stroke to attack black power on the basis of racism. And before you knew it, Martin Luther King was backtracking because he was put on the definitional backtrack. And he was the one who said, no, 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 we don't mean that. This is what we mean. No, okay. I think we're pretty clear on this. Reparatory justice is a philosophical concept. It's a broad philosophical concept that whenever there are crimes, there has to be justice. And justice follows criminality. One cannot exist without the other, not within a civilized environment. So it's a framework of ideas and philosophies that the victims of crimes are entitled to justice. And no matter how long it takes, that justice comes, it is reparatory justice. The reparations is the actual act of implementing justice. It's the act of doing it. If you're going to build schools for people, if you're going to build hospitals for people, if you're going to build universities for people, whatever you're going to do to help them, that investment you're going to make in a community that needs to have justice, the action itself, we might very well call that reparations. But it is a part of a broader concept that people have a right to fairness and to justice. So for us, there's no issue. Of course, we know that in the media, there are interest groups, and I know that there's a section of the British media that seeks to discredit the reparatory justice movement. They try to discredit the concept of even allocating resources to facilitate development, which is reparations. So yes, we are subject to all of that, and we read it, we listen to it. But we are not going to be deterred by that. This movement is over 200-300 years old. It's not going to go away. It's something that has to come to a crossroads at some moment. And we agree with Nelson Mandela, you know, it is always impossible until it happens. Yeah?
Hi, thank you. Good night. So my name is Rihanna Patterson. I'm the founder of the Dominica Dementia Foundation, but I'm also a PhD student at the University of Nottingham. So I have a question regarding the health matter that you mentioned. So as I know, there is a CARICOM Charter on Aging, and that has last been updated in 1999. But I think that we have an opportunity here to probably re-engage that policy and see how the Commission can maybe funnel in the resources to support people currently living with diabetes, currently living with dementia, and so forth. So I was wondering if you have any plans on maybe kind of tapping into that and supporting people that have been psychologically impacted by slavery. And then the other thing is how, like, I don't know, because it's early days, but have you thought about how you're going to reserve the funds for families who were owned by slaves? Like, will there be a reserve allocation? And how will the funding go towards directly to community members, if that makes sense? Because I kind of get the kind of sense that it's going through entities and bodies, or that's the kind of idea. But also I wanted to find out how it's going to directly be accessed by community members. Thank you.
Well, I can say to you on that, we haven't reached that moment as yet. one of the reasons why we're here is to engage the public and civil society organizations and seeking support for our objective, which is to be in a position to sit with the British government to talk about these matters, to sit in a summit, in an official formation, to discuss all of these issues. There's always a reaction that says, if you get reparations money, who's going to get the money? I mean, there's always that kind of thing. Well, you know, there's so many international legal processes that deals with this matter. There are systems. When you get in a room to discuss these matters, to negotiate these matters, these are things you will decide. If there are financial resources to be invested in the Caribbean communities, then the parties to that conversation will decide how the money will be used. Will there be a fund? Will there be a foundation? Will there be an international tribunal under the auspices of the court? All of those issues are things that will be discussed. And they're not new. When the Nuremberg trials in Germany, when it was decided that Germany will pay reparations to the Jewish people, all of those infrastructures were determined. There shall be a tribunal that is made up of the following people. And they're the ones who will allocate whatever resources are required and how, so that these things are not subject to willy-nilly kind of nonsense that someone is going to steal reparations money or politicians are going to get their hands on it and the communities will never see it. I mean, all of that is a lot of foolishness. You know, the international law provides for the management of all of these kind of situations. And there's no need for us to reinvent those structures. I believe that the structures of international law are very well in place. I will give you an example of this quickly. I gave a lecture at the University of Miami a few years ago, and at the end of the lecture, this elderly lady came up to me and she said, Professor Beckles, have you ever seen a reparations check? I said, no. I said, well, I want, and she opened her handbag and she took this check out. Now, when the Nuremberg decided that those people in the Jewish community who had been massacred and who were able to escape, those few, that they were entitled to reparations for 4 generations. And this lady, her parents were killed by the Germans when they invaded Poland, and they were able to escape and got through to the United States. The agreement was that those who came to the USA, that the German money that was paid would be paid into the Federal Reserve. So the federal government receives those reparations monies from the German government, and the US government writes checks to these people every month. And this lady showed me her check for $8,000, and every month she gets a check for $8,000. And this is part of the reparations that of a survivor of the Jewish Holocaust. So thousands and thousands of Jewish people, they get their check every month. Now, of course, the black people who work in the post office, they post these checks all over the country. So they know what those checks are. The black people who work in the banks, when the Jewish people come and they lodge their checks to their account, they see this. So the black Americans are exposed daily to these reparations checks being paid to these Jewish people for the crimes committed against them. And therefore, they have a reasonable expectation that in America, this is what we want. This is what we want in America, that we want our checks for our enslavement, and we want them posted every month. So they are following that Jewish narrative, okay? In CARICOM, we are not moving in that direction. We are calling for a development strategy for our countries. And we have taken the view that there is a debt that Britain owes to the Caribbean. There is a debt. And we would like to sit down and figure out how we can do this for mutual benefit. How can we do this to mutual benefit? We don't want to do this in a circumstance of conflict because we want to be post-conflict. We don't want to have a settlement and then the conflict intensifies the past. Whatever we want to do has to diffuse the conflict, bring an end to it, so that we can go forward in a fundamentally partnering arrangement. So that is what we have conceptualized as the CARICOM approach. And we want to have that approach in relation to agriculture. We want to have it in education and public health and technology transfer. We want to deal with the question of debt. When these countries became independent, they got no support from Britain whatsoever. And therefore, they had to fund their development by debt. All the schools, all the bridges, all the roads that they built when they transitioned from colony to nation, they had to borrow that money from Britain. And they borrowed it from all over the place just to do basic nation building. So we started our journey and up to our necks in debt. But here's the narrative. Oh, those Caribbean peoples are in debt because the governments are overspending, the governments are not frugal, and they're not being fiscally responsible, and all of that is a narrative. The truth of the matter is that the basic functions of a nation required borrowing to put in place. And these countries have extended themselves to invest in basic infrastructure. Now they have to pay debt at high levels of interest. And we believe that this is not fair. These are small nations. These are small nations with 200,000 people, 300,000 people, small nations. And they've had to borrow to put basic things in place after 300 years of colonization. We think that Britain should cancel those debts. We believe they should cancel those debts to these small countries. Cancel those debts, not fair. And I should tell you that we are in the conservative end of the conversation. I want you to recognize that we are criticizing the Caribbean in some quarters for being soft. We are seen as, oh, those Reparations Commission people are so soft. We shouldn't be asking for debt cancellation. We should be saying to our governments, do not recognize the debt. Debt non-recognition. Not debt cancellation, debt non-recognition. So that debate is also around us. Okay? So we are carrying what I might very well call, we are carrying the middle ground of a conversation. But there are people on both sides, in both the UK and in the Caribbean, who would say, we should not be begging for reparations. It is demeaning for us to be doing that. You've gone through slavery. You've gone through colonization. Why are you begging your oppressors for support? That's a contradiction. I mean, Louis Farrakhan, who has been a friend of mine for years, and you all know Louis Farrakhan, the civil rights leader of the United States. And Louis will send a message to me. Hilary, I love you, my brother. But you see, this black people begging white people for help? No, stop it, Hilary, stop it. Stop it. And I would say, Mr. Farrakhan, give me a chance to do this thing. So it's a complex situation, but we are faced in our respective situations with opposition even in our space for doing this. And there are those, of course, who say that, you know, the British people will never have the internal decency to do the right thing. They don't have it in them. So we will say that's not true. We looked at the history, and there has always been a community of people in this country who have stood up against wrong and badness. They've always stood up against it. And we want to tap into that spirit, and let us get on the same page, and let's have a partnership to do the right thing for everyone. And I think we could end it there for now. And I really want to thank all of you for coming here this evening, taking time out, and blessings on all of you. Okay.
I've been ruminating this with
Sure.
friends and colleagues. And it comes, you talked about the Church of England, you talked about the conversation around the Catholic Church, etc. And then you talk about money. And million hectares of clothing. Okay, the Church of England owns 300,000 acres within not just the UK but within the islands. And you talk about assets and land and the British government with its governor's houses and plantations has land. Some of the conversations we've been talking about is actually taking some of that land, disused land, and using the assets from that, the money from that, to put as part of reparations, put back into building up education, building up housing, building up health. Are you having those conversations? Because they're some of the conversations that are taking place in America. My colleague talks about, particularly in San Francisco. What are you doing when you're talking to the British government? You need the Church of England around the table. 100 million is nothing in terms of what they're trying to do. You need more than just an apology from the Catholic Church. You need to say you own so much land that is just lying there doing nothing. Are you having those conversations? I'm sorry, I had to ask the question. I'll sit down. You can answer.
No, it's okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Well, as you can appreciate, my friend, we are a commission of CARICOM governments, and we have a remit. Our remit is not to negotiate with the British government. Our remit is to raise consciousness, provide information to the public, provide historical knowledge, contemporary understanding. So we are here really with a mandate to raise awareness in order to facilitate a future dialogue. What we are suggesting is that a time must come and should come where the governments of CARICOM will sit with the British government and in their official capacities work through what it is that needs to be worked through. We don't have that authority, we don't have that remit, and we cannot go beyond the terms of reference of our commission. So yes, we would like to imagine that when that time comes, when the governments of the region and the governments of Britain will sit and work through what they think they can and what should be done, that these are some of the issues that they will discuss. And hopefully they will discuss that. The governments, however, have said to us, well, you can have conversations with civil society institutions, but government to government is exclusively our domain, government to government. But you may engage with the banks that have said, listen, we apologize for our engagement in slavery, slave trade. We can engage with them. The Church of England, as you have said, has owned slaves across the Caribbean. They used to stamp the slaves on the chest with a hot iron, C of E, Church of England. So all of that is in our historical context. So yes, we are in a position to have those discussions with all of these civil society institutions. So in brief, therefore, we have been having those conversations with institutions. We've had conversations with the Church of England. We've had conversations with financial institutions. And we don't always agree, but we're having those conversations. There are many families, as you know, that have come forward and say, our families have been enriched by slavery, and we have inherited that wealth and that privilege, and we have apologized on behalf of our families for what they have done historically, and we will work through with you what we can do on behalf of our family to make some kind of reparatory justice. And our colleagues here have all been involved in those kinds of conversations. I know that Eric has been talking to the Gladstone family that produced Prime Minister of this country, and that family has come to Guyana to speak about what they did there, the lands they own, the plantations they own. So yes, he has been having that conversation. Mr. Gill here has been having those conversations in Grenada in respect of the Trevelyan family that enslaved thousands of people in Grenada, and the descendants of the Trevelyan family have stood up, put their hands up and said, we apologize for what our family has done, and they have been talking to the Grenada Commission and the people of Grenada about the atonement that they wish to make on behalf of their family historically for the circumstance. So we have been having those kinds of conversations. In the early stages, lots of work to be done. but we are very appreciative of the fact that institutions and families and universities and so on have been coming forward to say, yes, we have this historical legacy, we want to have a different future, let us talk about it. And we've been having those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Hilary. Commissioners, I'll be very brief. You've left us so much to reflect on with respect to this complex issue. And as a student myself, two things really stuck out. One is clarification about an issue that I'm often asked in my role as director of the Institute, which is, what is the CARICOM Reparations Commission actually asking for? And you've clarified that you are asking for partnership in a mutually beneficial development program. And the second were your words, Sir Hilary, that we are all in this together. I'd like to just finish with some thank yous. Thank you to the CARICOM Reparations Commission, Sir Hilary, the commissioners, Mr. Eric Phillips, Dr. Niambi Hall Campbell Dean, Mr. Arley Gill, Dr. Hilary, who has really put in a huge amount of work to bring us all together tonight, Grace. Also, just quickly, our team at the Institute, Leslie, Olivia, Jane, Corinne, Bronwyn, Megan, Oku, who's a senior fellow with us, who has been campaigning tirelessly for the memorialization of victims of transatlantic slavery as part of an NGO called Memorial 2007. And there's a maquette in the hallway I urge you all to look at as you leave. And also to our friend on the audio-visual behind the lights here, thank you for this evening. Thank you for all of you. Before you leave, please take the time to get to know each other. There's another gentleman outside, I believe his name is Emmanuel, who has books relevant to this topic you may be interested in. And may this be just another step along the journey of the many conversations we still need to have. Thank you.